Hey everyone, giving you a little bit of an additional few minutes to the start of this healing video, and it's because there was a lot of things I would have liked to have said, trying to keep it into the 40-minute period, but there was one point that I didn't make that I think is important, that I want you to keep in mind as you listen to the actual video that I made. And that's the concept of the placebo. The placebo, of course, is where, in a sense, two people are given some sort of assistance for a similar problem. One person is given an actual drug, an actual herb, an actual cure, an actual something, and the second person is given a fake of it, something that the person believes is the real substance, but is, nothing. It's water and sugar usually. And yet the amazing thing becomes that oftentimes the person given the placebo, given nothing, has equal or in fact better results than the person given a real cure. And the question becomes, what then is really doing the curing if this is true? And in fact, if you read something like The Holographic Universe, I think there's a whole chapter in there on the power of the placebo, and in many cases of things to cure incurable disease, people on the brink of death, but believing that they were getting something, just the belief that they were getting something that would cure them was enough to actually cure them. Often to the point until if by accident they found out that, oh, actually I was given nothing, I was on a placebo trial, they die in 2 weeks. That somehow the belief structure has generated, the faith has generated the actual curing, the actual healing. Darren Brown has an entire episode of one of his shows in which is all about the placebo, in which he gets, I think in this case was people who had extreme fears or extreme phobias, and he got them with the belief that a pill that I think he called Ramayadin, which is your mind, an anagram of your mind, got tens, 20, 100 people to literally drop a ton of their fears. So a lot of this question has to, on one side, has to become how much of any healing that happens comes only from the person, comes nothing from the outside. It all comes from the person's own inner power that is switched on through some sort of belief on something going on outside themselves. And how much is the actual healing practice going to go? Because of course we'll all know stories too of some uncle, some friend who, acupuncture's a load of crap, or I'm not taking any of these stupid herbs, and eventually for some reason they just they've run out of options and they say, okay, I'll go to this appointment, or I'll take these things too, whatever. And then all of a sudden they work. They actually get better, and the person has to say, you know what, I think there's something in this actually, because I gave this 0 chance of success and it has worked. So what's the dividing line between the placebo, the belief factor? What's the how much of it is actually what the healer/healing mechanism actually is? What is the percentage of that works? And therefore, something like these faith healers, and again, Darren Brown goes through a whole thing on one of his shows again about faith healers and how he can take somebody off the street basically in a week to become the equivalent of a faith healer and produce miraculous results in all sorts of people. Generally, when the faith healer, the ones who were making the big bucks from this, normally the results are very short-lived, and when nobody gets a result, they always tell them the problem is you. You didn't have enough faith. You didn't believe enough. But that would be technically then the opposite, because the faith healer, if that's true, if faith is the thing that actually heals the person, then that means the faith healer didn't do that. They didn't do their job. They couldn't get the person to believe deeply enough for the internal healing to happen, whatever that healing is. So the blame shouldn't be on the person. The blame should go back then to the healer of then, in that case, I didn't get you to believe, I didn't provide you a good enough placebo. That's the thing in that Darren Brown episode. But I'm going to post it below. Really go and watch it. Watch it because it's amazing the amount of money he had to put into this, the amount of thought he had to put into it. It's not just like he got the people and gave them a pill and said, oh yeah, this will fix you. He created an entire fake, massive drug company in order to make the people involved in the placebo test really believe that they were getting something cutting edge, something brand new, something of the most amazing science available. And it was the more he could build on the potential belief of the people, the greater it was going to work. So I need to point this out because before now I get into all the stuff about the differences between curing and healing and how healers seem to, the real healers seem to operate in such a very selfless manner and don't even openly charge for their services, things of like becoming an open tube. I also want you to make sure you always keep in the back of your mind this placebo concept of wondering, if I take, if I'm feeling stressed and I take some lemon balm, citron melissa lemon balm tea, which is designed to de-stress the system, and I do, and I notice after I drink it, I feel much calmer, great. How much of it was actually from the properties of the lemon melissa? How much was it my personal belief that the properties in the lemon melissa could be operated within me, that the lemongrass could affect my system? How much had nothing to do with the lemongrass at all? How much had to do with just simply my belief that it's going to work, and it worked once before, so that strengthens my belief every time I drink it? How much of each is the actual true factor? How much does, because again, it does seem, obviously, certain herbs, certain practices, certain foods will have an effect on the body, positively or negatively. Yet there are other stories of like, Ram Dass, where he would go and give the Indian yogi the hallucinogenic drugs, and the yogi would just, eat like 40 or 50 of them and just operate like nothing had happened. Just didn't affect them. And again, how much of that is just the belief? How much does the object or the thing in the object affect us, related to how much we believe the object will affect us? But that doesn't, in a sense, also mean that the things in reality are created to do certain things. That as long as you know it's going to better help help calm my nerves if I take lemongrass or oats or chamomile than it is to drink a cup of coffee. That the way nature is set up, that if it's random choice, certain things, and your belief structure is exactly equal to everything, certain things should, based on its properties, have more effect than others. But how much then would the belief change? If your belief was so strong that a cup of coffee would calm you down to the complete level, would it? And if you really believed that taking the chamomile tea is going to create even more stress and cause damage to your system, would it? So I'm just adding that to the start of the video. You can now go through, watch the next 40-some minutes of my discussing curing and healing. Hi everyone. Welcome to November the 5th, 2020. And as we wait for some sort of result, which we might be waiting for quite a long time, I'll finally put up my Being Healed of Curing video. And this video might actually create some controversy for some people, I think. But we're going to try to discuss in this the difference between curing and healing. They sound like the same words, but they are very different, and they mean very different things. And as we go through, as a lot of people are going to go through more and more difficulty, and particularly more and more mental difficulty now, really getting an understanding of what's curing and what's healing, I think, can be important. And we're going to take that into a few different areas. I'm going to share, I'm not really going to be sharing how to heal anybody or how to fix yourself. I just want to get an understanding of what what the two differences are, and how generally all you see in the world around you is curers and not healers. And then we're going to take that into layers of detail. This started a long time ago, after examining all what I guess it can be called alternate medicine very carefully. A lot of people, particularly those who get highly involved in alternative medicine, turn away from Western medicine at some point. They see that the Western medical system is very good if you have a gunshot wound or your leg is chopped off or something. They seem to do very good with extreme problems. But anything non-extreme, the system really doesn't know how to look after anyone, how to care for anyone, and in fact is just a pharmaceutical drug pushing platform is really what it is. Don't really get to the root of a problem, don't really find out what's going on, throw some drugs at someone and hope the outer problem goes away. But once you turn to alternative medicine and think, well, okay, this is much more natural, this is a much more holistic way of going about things, it doesn't take long to dig into that to find that there's not a lot of results in that field either. And there's reasons for that. It's also, I went through years of various strange illnesses, which we'll talk about at the end of this. We'll also be talking about the shamanic illness at the end of this. And in the course of tremendous amount of seeking and looking into various cures and alternative practices, have you seen what these people charge? Have you seen the cost that it takes to go to almost any alternative healer? Doesn't matter whether it's an acupuncturist, a Reiki class, a herbalist, energy healer, whatever, right? The cost you pay to go to them is staggering, and the what's the word I'm looking for? The expectation of the healer is nearly zero. There's no guarantee that anything's going to happen to you, and generally you'll find what happens is you'll feel better for a very short period of time, and your problem is back within a few days or a few weeks, which means you either have to keep seeing the healer. They'll tell you 10 or 15 times or something, they need their $10,000 out of you, or they just somehow say it's your fault, you did something wrong, and this is not the world of the healer. So let's look into a little bit of this and discuss what healing is and what it isn't. And I start with a quote. "I don't believe in patching tires. I believe in removing nails from the highway." And that's a quote from Rose, and that's a very important quote because you can hear a door open in the background. My cat has decided to come home. And that's really important because that explains healing and curing. Now, curing, if I can describe this simply, curing is any sort of physical or mental problem that you have. So the problem, if you have a sore shoulder, if you have a sore stomach, if you have a bad knee, if you're depressed, if you're upset, if something doesn't work, if something is not working properly, right? We're using the word diseased, which means you're at some form of unease, some form of illness, some sort of problem. And I'm one to certainly not attack completely the world of curing because, if my knee is sore and I think, hey, if there's some practice or herb or exercise that can make the knee feel better, of course, you're interested in having yourself feel better. If your stomach is bad or you have pain in your ear or your eye, of course, that's only natural. You'd like to find something that helps ease that problem. The difference between healing, though, is healing is not concerned with the problem. It's not concerned that you have a stomach problem. It's not concerned that you have, a foot problem or a back issue, or it's interested in what the foundation root, the deepest roots of that problem are. And by finding those roots and removing them, the outer causes will have to go away on their own automatically and won't come back. So that's the difference. If you get a cure of something, the cure might last a few days, a few weeks, a few months, maybe a year, but it will come back. It'll come back because the foundation, underlying root of that outer manifested problem hasn't been ended. So that's short term, the difference between curing and healing. But to get to be able to do that is not is not a very easy functioning practice. I was lucky in my life to have been able to watch 4 what I would classify as real healers work. And they each had their own very specific ways of working, and I want to share a little bit of it with you, again, to maybe help you see that if you need help, who do you want to go to? Where do you want to focus your attention and your time? Because the curer wants to try to fix you. The curer wants to wave a magic wand, or you expect the curer to wave a magic wand and fix you. The healer wants to show you that you already have your magic wand. The healer doesn't do it. The healer shows you the inner power you already have so that you can heal yourself. Does that make sense? The curer is running a business. The curer is running a business in which they are the wand and you need them in order to feel better. The healer has no business. The healer is just there to show you the healing power you already have. Sorry it took me 8 minutes to get to what's vital, but that's the most vital part of what we're dealing with here. And again, like I'm saying, without Mr. Park was very interesting, because Mr. Park, the Korean monk, he did some bizarre healings that I'll talk about as we go through this video. And the healings he always talked about he claimed, had to get to the level of the DNA. That if the DNA, your absolute foundation level of substance, if the DNA isn't being transformed, isn't being, in a sense, changed, then there'll be no difference to the outer manifested problems that the person faces. That's sort of the deepest store, I guess you could also call it, like in the depth of the auric field, right? All of these areas that if that is not worked on, if it's only just, you've got a problem in your body, so here's some herbs and take the herbs for a while, you'll feel better, that's not going to really do much. In ancient Egypt, they had a very specific system of 3 types of healing. And the first step in their healing program, as I can understand it, I can't prove this is true, but from the research and the time there and the spending time in their healing temples, I'm pretty sure this is how it works. So step 1 is to remove any parasitic beings, demonic entities, any non-human energy-stealing attachment that a person has, because as long as there is a non-human force attached to the person, you'll never be able to properly heal, because no matter what energy or change happens, that being is going to suck it all out, or the being is going to create specific circumstances in a person's experience or in their mind that will stop the healing from happening. And they were very specific. They weren't the Egyptian doctors. They were like, they were specific possession removers is what they were. And they really didn't do much of the other type of the next stages of the healing work. That was their job, because that job is hard enough. That's to get to the point where you can actually do that and do it properly is a lifelong pursuit. So that was stage 1, and that's, of course, that stage of the Egyptian papyrus text is the one was laughed at by modern science. Modern science laughed at these superstitious, crazy, backward Egyptians. The second stage of Egyptian healing involved, we can call it sound therapy, but the best way to say is vibrational therapy. Sound seems to be one of the main things used, but not necessarily. They could also the certain chambers or the specific places where the healing took place in the temples have their own very balancing, harmonizing energy in the space itself. So that was stage 2, was to harmonize that. Once the beings are gone, once the parasites are gone, was to harmonize the body energy. So once the exterior energy has been harmonized, which you might also say in Mr. Park's terms would have been, you might say cleansing or harmonizing the DNA structure. You could say it's one of the two things. So the Egyptians did a lot of it with sound, but there's a lot of ways you can do it. But that's to then have the energetic function of the not the physical body, but of the non-physical, moving and working in a quality fashion. The third step would be the step that modern medicine, when looking at the Egyptian papyrus, has said, these Egyptians actually knew something, and that moves into the realm of dentistry and herbal medicine and using various forms of surgery and anything now we can think of as curing, as helping the body to overcome a problem that exists, is stage 3 in the Egyptian healing process, not stage 1. That if stage 1 and 2 weren't completed, stage 3 couldn't have happened. And like I say, Mr. Park was very clear about that for him it was all about cleansing a person's DNA to actually clean their complete structure. But he said that kind of work is very hard, it's very challenging, the person has a lot of work to do, and over the short period of time you will not see any the person will see very few changes. Not much is going to happen. So he claimed you also had to do some what he called bullshit healing with the person, which would be curing. You had to do some things for the patient that made them feel better in the short term, because that was their way of thinking something was happening. That was their way of thinking something was happening, but that was a small little part of all the other stuff that was going on that on its own would have showed no change immediately. And a big part of any healer I've known, the native medicine men that I've known, like I say, Mr. Park, a few others, has been being able to create a feeling of faith in the patient that something can happen. That a big part of this is the patient must feel the possibility that healing can occur. That if the patient has no faith, has no belief, has no, I don't want to say faith, that's not the right, but no possibility, a lot's going to be blocked out. That it's not so much what the healer can do, it's what the patient will allow the healing experience to have happen for them. Really good quote from Bearhart. I got to know his one of his grandchildren, and he shared a lot of stories actually in my time with him of how Bearhart was like and how he shared knowledge and how he worked with patients. But a quote from him was, "When treating a patient, never let doubt come into your mind. A patient can pick up on that. I don't care how wide the smile is on your face. If you doubt, you are doubting Creator's power." So this was a big part. Others, of course, would say that they need to make the patient laugh. That if the patient is able to be amused in the course of the healing process, there will also be the possibility of great change that happens. Yeah, it was, in my days with Mr. Park, we did some really, he used a lot of strange stuffs. It was, we saw the cupping rituals, where an Asian tradition, and where cups are placed on specific points on the body in order to draw poisons up, but Mr. Park would use 60, 70 of them at a time to literally try to draw the entire group of poisons out of the body all at once. He had tubs filled with healing bacteria underneath pyramids. He used colloidal silver mixtures. There were these very strange teas. There was these foods we had to eat. We had breath work. We had periods of like almost solitary confinement. There were like I talked about another one, the beatings with the rice spoon, and there were so many strange things that were going on, and I think some of the things were designed as real healing practices. Some things were designed as curing practices to just short-term make us feel better. Some of the things I think were just simple tests with us to see would we keep going on with something that would seem so crazy. And his was one way of doing it. I mean, when I looked at people like Bruce or Clayton, the healers in the native tradition, they were very clear that they were never doing the healing. When you were in the sweat lodge with one of them, they were always very clear that it was the lodge, it was the rocks, it was the spirit, it was not them, right? That they themselves had nothing to do with it. And if you ever tried to thank them for they would accept your thanks, so to speak. They would, but they often made it clear that, they're not doing anything. They're creating the space so that the things that heal can come and do that. I would recommend, if you're really interested in hearing what healing is like compared to curing, read that book I've shown a few times on Fool's Crow. Fool's Crow, the Lakota medicine man, it's discussed very clearly in a lot of cases how he healed, what his focus was. And Fool's Crow, very importantly, his healing was 4 sessions a day for 4 straight days. So both he and the patient had to make an unbelievable commitment that for 4 days, four straight days, all that was involved was the healing practice. His end result was almost like 100%. There's very few cases of anyone who came to him with any problem of any kind, if he accepted them, that did not get healed after the 4 days. And that's important. After the 4 days, that's it. They needed no further healing work from anyone on that particular condition that they came to him for. Something new could arise, of course, in next year, 3 years, 5 years, 10 years, but whatever that condition was, the healing had cleared the foundation of it, and so that condition was gone. So I highly recommend reading that book on Fool's Crow. And one of the most important elements of all of these people, doesn't matter whether it's people I haven't met like Fool's Crow or Bearheart, but the ones I have met, they were not running a business. They were not putting a sign out their front door that says, help is available here, but only if you pay me $140. If you want a session, it's going to cost you $185. And this is extremely critical into understanding what healing is. And I'm going to read you a quote from a book, The Path of Masters by Julian James, back in 1939. He was a guy who went to India, I think, for 10 years and just spent his time going from supposed guru yogi to guru yogi, trying to learn what they knew, what they did, how they lived. And his response, or his quote in the book, is, real masters never charge for their services, nor do they accept payment in any form for their instructions. This is a universal law, yet it is amazing to see the thousands of eager seekers go on paying huge sums of money for spiritual instruction. These teachers are always self-sustaining. They are never supported by their students or by public charity. And you have to see that this is an extremely important topic, and that is paying for healing. Now, on the initial problem with this is in our current world, the current Western medical system. The current Western medical system is set up in that a doctor or medical group gets paid every time a sick person comes to them, right? The payment comes to the doctor / organization with a sick patient. Then the doctor gets paid. If there were no sick patients anymore, the entire medical system would earn no money. Thus, an entire system has been set up that requires sick people. Think about this for a second. The entire Western medical system is set up to require people to be sick. And it's been set up, if you look at it really carefully, it's been set up in such a way to have people not be dead, because dead people can't pay the system any money. But they can't be well people, because if everybody was well and healthy and well-adjusted and happy and living a decent life, the medical system would make zero. So you have to box people, the majority of people, in this middle ground where there's going to be constant renewal of some forms of illness, some forms of problem that they have to keep going and using the system so the system gets money. The system would make more sense if doctors only got paid every time their patient was well. That if a patient, if they have like 200 patients, if every 6 months, if that patient never had to go see them, the doctor would get paid. How just that, would that change the medical system immediately? In that as soon as a sick patient showed up at their door, the doctor would be 100% focused on, I got to get this person well, and I got to find every possible method I've got available to me, even ones I don't know, because if I don't get them well in 6 months, I get no money from them. That would change the whole system. It would change, same thing with alternative healers, right? Again, you go, you pay for your acupuncture appointment, you pay for your Reiki session, you pay for whatever, but there's no guarantee that anything's happened from them. You just, well, I hope you feel better. Bye. Thanks for $150. And what's being set up is a system of sickness. Such a system where you pay when you're ill and you pay whether you get better or not, automatically creates a system of keeping the world sick. Now, and this moves to the field of spiritual teachings. I don't want to get into it too much, but it's the same thing. It has the same layer of spiritual teachings of, if anyone is, I mean, look at what some of these people charge to hear their lectures, or read their books, or go to their DVDs, or get some sort of special online counseling with them, or whatever. It's a massive amount of money these people make. I believe one of the biggest spiritual names, I don't want to say his name openly, but he was selling pictures of himself on his website, selling 8x10 pictures of himself for like $10. And people were, I'm sure he sold 500,000 of them. So what's the problem? I mean, people need to eat, people need to pay their rent, people need to live in the world. And the presentation is always, if I don't charge money from people coming to get help from me, I'm using up my time, I'm using up my energy, I'm using up my wisdom, or my time spent in this. I deserve something for my time. And yes, you do. The problem is, if you turn healing into a business, the ones who really know how to heal, the ones who really, and again, they're very clear, they don't heal. The power comes from something outside of them. And I don't want to say it's like channeled in, it's some sort of like, I don't want to give you that impression that something comes into them and then they send it. It's not really like that. They just create doorways for the patient, for the healing to happen. And they've all been very clear that if they try, and I'm going to talk in a lot of detail here about this, because it's very, very important. And they say that if they started charging for their services, openly charging for their services, they would lose their power. That they would keep a small amount of power. They would keep a small. There's a natural ability that all humans have access to. Normally, they can keep that. But this secondary source that comes from, you might say, from beyond the dream, from outside the dream somehow, they would lose access to that. And that's the difference. That's, as soon as you have somebody doing it as a business, there's a certain amount of power they are not going to be able to have. And there's a certain amount of then healing cannot occur with them. That doesn't mean, of course, that they were comfortable receiving gifts. I gave lots of gifts to Bruce and Clayton, sometimes money, sometimes food, sometimes whatever they needed. But so often I would give, I remember this so often, I would be, once in a while I might be in a sweat lodge and I would give, say, give Bruce $20 or something for, just, I just wanted to give it to him. He would get it and he would, oh, thank you. And he would hold it in his hands and he'd right away give it to his nephew. It would just be gone. I'd just say anything often with Clayton, and he would just, if I gave him $20 or $30, oh, that's great. My brother, he's having a tough time. He's having a tough time buying food this week. So yeah, that's great. And he would walk over right away and give his brother the $30. But I know Clayton himself doesn't have food in his fridge. It's not like he doesn't need the $30 for himself to actually look after himself. But as soon as it came to him, he went out and gave it to somebody else in need. These were amazing things to watch. And Clayton in particular, I don't want to discuss a lot of this. I'm trying to share some of this in this video, but he shared a lot of the concepts of healing that had been taught with him, not how to do it, but things like this: how to handle this kind of patient, how to handle these kind of problems, what to do when donations come in, what to do with when tobacco is given to you in his tradition. And he shared a lot of that with me. Because the key is if a person in this profession needs money, it can't be taken from those in need or in pain, which of course are the very people coming for the healer asking for help. And to call it a donation when it's obviously set up in such a way that there will be guilt and social pressure placed on those who refuse is dishonest, and it's not a true donation. Remember that the core of, say, Christianity, right, is that parable in the Bible of, if you bring money into the temple, you run the risk of some carpenter from the countryside coming along and turning all the tables and showing you that spirituality, healing, knowledge, wisdom is not about money. It's about something else. And okay, I had someone explain a way, though, that money could be involved, because obviously, I often gave money to somebody because it's also part of it's weird because it's part of the healing practice itself. If you go to a healer and the healer helps you, and you don't in any way say proper thank you to that healer, that healing will stop somewhere along the way very quickly for you, because the Spirit is trying to show, have you honestly received, and are you honestly thankful for what's happened to you? Because if you're not, the healing will stop. And so there's many ways to do that. You can do something, you can offer something to the healer themselves, you can do something in return for them. It doesn't have to be monetarily. You can give them real gifts, not like a gift like, I bought you this clock for your house, and well, the healer doesn't need a clock. What's the point? You actually have to then, if it's going to be a gift or an object, it has to be something that the healer requires. Giving Bruce a grandfather clock to put in his house would be useless. But seeing that his pitchforks and his shovels are pretty much can't be used anymore for carrying the rocks in the sweat lodge, and getting him new shovels and pitchforks, well, that's a valuable gift to someone like that. If you wanted to give money, there was a story of a healer that was very interesting, the way this guy worked. And this, I think, is closer to maybe how the modern world could operate, and that is, he said, you come to your first healing session, and the healing session is free, with the idea that you should be 80 to 90% fixed with this session. He was very clear that one session is mostly all you need. And you go and you wait 2 weeks. And if the healing has worked, If you just need the last little bit of the tune-up, then you come back and you pay him for 2 sessions. If nothing has happened to you, if for some reason you don't feel any better at all after 2 weeks, well, the cost is 0. And at least to me, that has fairness to it, because now at least if you're asking for a payment, you're only asking for payment after the session has happened, after a relatively okay amount of time where there has been time to show that the healing has actually had effect. Because that would put tremendous... How many healers out there? Healers, cures. How many curers out there with a sign on their door have anybody get helped at all? I know a lot of people, and they've gone from cure to cure to cure to cure, and the amount that's improved for them is zero after months or years. And they've spent thousands of dollars and tremendous amounts of their time, because the healer has no guarantee that the healer, and I hate using these words, the curer is giving no guarantee that anything's going to happen for the person coming to them. It'd be so different if, yeah, the cost is $150, but you don't pay it for 3 weeks until you, for sure, something has changed in you. That's at least fair. That's at least completely fair. You know, I talk with a lot of people on Skype and Zoom and whatever, and who feel I've got something maybe that can help them. I'm not going to tell somebody, I'm only going to talk to you if you give me $100. I mean, as soon as I tried to say that to somebody, there would be whatever help I might have for people would stop. I know for sure it would stop. Because it's happened to people that I know, people that had some really good knowledge, and they started earning a good living off of it. And then all of a sudden, they just weren't the same person anymore, and they didn't have the same power. But I also know that it's important that if somebody is getting something from our time together, provable improvement somehow in a few weeks or a month down the road, it's right for them to find a way to say thank you, a proper way to say thank you to me. Because if they don't, then one, they're in a sense taking advantage of me, and that would then mean they're really taking advantage of themselves, because they really don't value the change. They really don't value the work. They don't value the healing they've done, and almost guaranteed, whatever has happened positive for them will flip really soon. So it's a two-way street. The real healer has to be open to just share and to do, because that's what the Spirit is guiding them to do. Once they've taken on that role, that's their job, you might say. It's not a profession, it's a role they have to play. Even in the modern world, that's not like it was in tribal society, where of course the healer was looked after by the tribe because people needed to be healed, and that was just their job. Other people would do the hunting, other people would collect the water, other people would make the clothes. The healer just had to focus on healing. It's not really like that in our world, but it's still, as soon as the person drops into the material with it, it's going to get blocked. Not much as no one's going to get healed. And because if you think back to tribal society, right, if you go back 500, 1,000, 5,000 years, if there was a healer in the village that the village was looking after, and when people got sick, they went to the healer and nobody got better, that'd be the end of the guy's healing career. Or healing, it'd be over. They would be, you're done. You're either doing something else or get out, because we're not going to be supporting somebody that's creating zero. So those healers at that time, in order to hold on to that, I don't want to call it status, because that's not the right word, but to hold on to what you might say, that focus of the village, you might say, looking after them, they had to make sure that they were looking after the village. It was a very important street, and the village understood that in order for the healer, the real healer, to do that, they had to be in really dangerous places. That there were a lot of dangerous things for the people in the village and the community that they didn't have to deal with, because the healer did. You know, they didn't have to fight a lot of demonic beings up front because the healer did that. They maybe didn't have to deal with a hurricane or a tornado because the healer dealt with that. And the healer had to deal with living a life of near constant pain in order to make sure that the rest of the village was okay. Because the real one who has really become a healer is without doubt has not gone through a happy life. As you'll read when I share the shamanic illness, someone who's become what you might call a real shaman, their life has been a broken hell in many cases. They've had to see the depth of darkness in order that when it's their turn to deal with the darkness for another, they've been there and they've experienced it and they know how to deal with it. And because of that, the real healers demand our utmost respect and our utmost, respect is the right word for not only what they've gone through, but for the things they're dealing with on our behalf that we can't even realize they're dealing with. And that's where the exchange is important. But the healer will never ask for that exchange until there's proof that change has occurred. There's no exchange without proof of the change. I'm going to leave that for now and move on to a really important final part of what healing was claimed to be, and that was something called rewiring from above, is the best way I can describe it. And I'm going to just discuss sort of a shamanic view of the healing process now, but for Native Americans that I know, they always said there was two sources of healing. That the above, what they called the above beings, so they saw sort of the spiritual energy as specific beings, and they're the primary source. The secondary source was just the healer and the patient, that they were a combined secondary source together, and that the function of the healer was only to increase the faith of the patient that they would get well. So a huge element of what the healer does in the Native tradition was to supply hope and calm and a belief in the power of these above beings. Because they claim that the mind is the first thing that must be healed, as all disease for them begins in the mind, or more simply, from foreign energy installations, parasitic beings that have infused into the mind of the patient and doesn't allow them to think clearly. And once the mind and the energy field was healed and the person is returned to being fully human, the body will follow very quickly. And because when a body is in high stress and when a mind is in high stress, one of their important elements of their healing process was to de-stress a person, and that meant happiness, humor, laughter, fun, and in many cases, elements of sacred sexuality were all a part of the ancient world of treating illness. And in fact, I've talked a bit about humor and laughter in my spiritual, in the video where I put out the spiritual humor. The sacred sexuality is something that probably at some point needs its own video, because it's something that's very confused in the modern world. It's confused as the masculine, feminine stuff I talked about in one of the other videos. It's just not understood. But I don't want to get into it here, but that is also an element of the ancient healing practices, and in fact, ancient knowledge, where you're at a completely different consciousness. But I don't want to go into more detail on that here. That can be another time. It was also interesting, I found, how, particularly like in the Lakota tradition, Lakota like to do their healing ceremonies in the nighttime, in what they call a black light. And it was very interesting to learn a little bit, right? I'm the white guy, I'm the outsider white guy. So what was being taught to me were, of course, little pieces of what would have been taught to someone from their own tradition. And but to learn why they like to work in the black light of the nighttime was very unique. And This idea of rewiring from above is this idea of first the healer, the real healer, the real shaman, has done what the Hopi call, created themselves to be a hollow tube. That if they are blocked with greed or self or ego or requirements, and that's why that discussion of the money stuff was so important, because that's the most easy form of seeing that in our modern world. If you're filled with that, then the healer cannot be filled with the healing power of these above beings or the spirit world or whatever. That they need to be an empty, hollow tube so that what can come from these other beings can fill them up because they're empty. And it is then that it's able to be transmitted. And that's another word that almost needs another video of itself. That's the word of transmission. Very big in the Zen tradition, which is the way of, in certain cases where a certain student who for some reason just can't make the trip point, he or she just can't see the final level. They're really, really blocked. That's where the Zen teacher can, in a sense, what you might call, zap the student briefly, very briefly, and share what awakening looks like for them so that they can kind of jump themselves. And unfortunately, there's a lot of curers out there who turn out to be very good curers by what can be called, zapping the student, by generating a tremendous energetic charge in themselves and firing it out. And in some way, that's what every little bit of curing actually is. Curing is a transfer of energy from the healer to the patient on some level. It doesn't matter whether it's acupuncture, direct stuff like energy, even if you're giving herbs or advice, or even if you share some, here's a book to read, here's an exercise to do, you've just exchanged some energy with that person. And combination of the more energy you exchange and can exchange with them, the more likely curing and the person and the patient will feel better. However, the weaker the healer will get. And if you look in over the last number of, say, 40, 50 years of pretty good cures that we've known, they tend to get sick, quite sick after 2 or 3 years. They burn themselves out. And they're burning themselves out because they're not at this point of being the Hopi hollow tube, the Native Indian hollow, the fool's crow, right? Fool's crow would never get tired. He would never get weakened. He would never get sick. Because what was happening, if there was any energy moving, transmitting from him to someone else, it was like, it would come, it would fill him, it would go. It wouldn't be his own personal energy that was being generated and used. It was this other energy that was using. So this idea of the hollow tube also means that the healer then won't get sick, that the healer then won't wind up with their own physical illness. And that's a big thing that happens to a lot of the curers out there. The curers, even though they have the greatest of intentions with what they do, it doesn't take them long to get ill themselves. Because there is a long, deep process of learning what healing is. I'm going to stop there. I still have 3 pages to discuss the shaman illness, and I will do that first thing tomorrow morning. So I'll add the second part on what a shamanic illness is, because it's good not to actually have that with this video anyway. I'll leave it there. I don't know if that's clarified anything for anyone or if it's made things more confusing, but people had asked for this, and so I'm sharing it, and we'll see what kind of response this generates. See you tomorrow.